All right, hello there. This video is part of a series of videos on corpus linguistic concepts, and in this video I'll talk about collocations. Yeah, right. Those of you who are my students and who have the materials that go with this lecture, do me a favor, open AntConc and navigate to a folder with corpus files that's called BNCA and choose it and load it into AntConc. And as a second step, so once you've got the data loaded into AntConc, it should like this. And after that, you should set the global settings to hide tags. Those of you who aren't my students, you can actually do this in a similar way. If you have AntConc, fire it up and load in a corpus and hide the tags that you have, if your corpus has tags, that is. Right, so what are collocations? Collocations are linguistic units that co-occur. So basically, these are words that go together well, yeah, from the famous song. And there are two different types of collocations. There are adjacent collocations, that is, linguistic units that occur directly next to each other. So frequent n-grams such as pretty well or I mean or on the other hand. And then there are so-called window collocations, that is, linguistic units that co-occur within a span of words, not necessarily next to each other, but rather in close proximity. So, for example, the words teacher and school. When you look at texts where you have teacher and school, quite frequently these words co-occur in, well, not too far from each other. Yeah, so you find utterances like at school, our teacher said this and this, or there's a phrase like a teacher during my first year at school, or a primary school teacher. So it's not that these words have to be directly next to each other. They can occur in a wider span. Those are called window collocations. Right, so how can we investigate these collocations? If you have the AntConc software with the BNCA files set up, I would ask you to type pretty well into the search window and hit start, and that should give you this kind of concordance display. We learn that in this corpus, which has about 12 million words, there are 44 instances of pretty well, and well, 17 of those you see in this window. Okay, so 44 instances of pretty well. Is that a collocation? Does it mean that pretty well are words that like to occur with each other? Or is this just something that we would expect to happen by chance? Yeah? The way to find that out is to look for pretty and well, not only in co-occurrence, but also in isolation. So the next thing I would like you to do is to search for pretty all by itself. And that should give you a result like this one here. 960 hits in this corpus. The first two actually show you that, okay, they are collocations with well. Here's another one. So that might already give you a little suspicion there, but hey, we're calculating this, yeah? So 44 instances of pretty well, 960 instances of pretty, meaning that there are 16? Is that true? Yeah, 916 instances of pretty without well. We still need to look for well, okay? So let's do that. Here is a concordance of well. So if you're doing this at home, just type in well into the search window, and this is what this gives you. You see it collects also a few hyphenated compounds like well attended or well armed. For now, we'll just leave these in, yeah. So we're squinting just a little bit. We're taking everything that looks like well, that this word search counts as a word, yeah, which basically is a string of letters with non-word characters to the left and right. Could be a white space, could be something else. So here you see that well attended is actually counted as two separate words, which it's not really the case, yeah, but let's just not talk about this, yeah, it's fine. Okay, so we have figured out the instances of pretty well, the instances of pretty, and now we have the instances of well. And we still need to determine the overall number of words in the corpus. And I told you it's around 12 million, but how do you actually determine that in AndConc? So I haven't talked to you about this, how AndConc allows you to figure out the number of words in the corpus that you're using. But one way to find that out is to use the word list tool that we've been using in class a little bit. Yeah. So in the main window, click on the rider that says word list, or well, in my case, it says word lit something. And then just hit start, and AndConc will give you this kind of display with the most frequent words on top. And the number that you're looking for is this here, word tokens. Okay, so this should appear on your screen in this way. If you have forgotten to hide the tags in the global settings, yeah, this would be the moment where you really find that out, because then it would show you all kinds of weird stuff going on with the tags and not this clean list of words that you see here. Okay. Right, so these four numbers, yeah, how often we find the collocation, how often we find word 1 in isolation, word 2 in isolation, and how often, well, how many words there are in the corpus as a whole. Those four numbers are crucial for calculating collocational strength. Yeah, we can determine whether something is a collocation or just a chance co-occurrence of two words. So, in order to do the math, we need what is called a contingency table. So that's a table that looks like this. If you've done a little bit of philosophy or logic or anything along those lines, this will be vaguely familiar to you, except philosophers don't have the totals because they don't count things. Not everything that can be counted counts, just saying. Anyway, so you notice that there are, well, basically two dimensions here. In the columns it says word 1, not word 1, and then totals. And here in the rows we have word 2, not word 2, and then totals. This table will contain frequencies that are informed by these four questions here, which are crucial. So question 1, how often do we find pretty well? You remember that, yeah? 44. How often do we find pretty? 960. How often do we find well? 11,000 whatever, yeah? And how many words are there in the corpus? 12,422,000 something. 12,400,000. See, numbers. I'm not good with numbers. Anyway, so let's start filling this table, shall we? Yeah. So the first field here, where it says pretty in the columns and well in the rows, those are the instances of pretty well that we have looked for earlier with AndConc. Yeah. So this would be 44. How often do we find pretty? That number is down here in the totals for pretty. Yeah. So the way to read this column is we have pretty. Yeah. We find it with well for a certain number of cases. We find it surrounded by other words, not well, but you know, pretty good, pretty decent, pretty fly. Yeah. And all of these are put in this, yeah, and together the instances where pretty is followed by well or something else, they give us the total numbers of pretty. So down here, the green field, that should add up to 960. Yeah, so all instances of pretty that we have in the corpus. Okay. If you want to do this exercise, you can pause this video here and imagine how you're going to fill the remaining cells of the table, because you could be figuring this out by now. Yeah. If you're like me, you can't. Yeah. But maybe you have a thing for math. Okay. So I'm going to continue now. What's here in the blue field? Well, here we have the overall corpus frequencies for well, which were 11,800 or something. Yeah. So we have well following pretty. We have well following words that are not pretty. Fairly, well, not well, and so on and so forth. Yeah. And together they add up to this number that we have here. All right, the very last field, the one down here in the bottom right cell, that is the overall number of words in a corpus. And usually the figure that you have down here in the contingency table, that tends to be a crazy large figure because, well, it's the whole number of words, the grand total of words in a corpus, and corpora, they tend to be quite large, so it's not unusual to find a 7 or 8 digit number down here. Right, so let's fill the table in with actual frequencies. So down here we have 44 instances of pretty well, fine. Here we have 960 instances of pretty, and you notice that we don't have to use andconc to find out how often pretty is followed by a word that is not well. We can simply do the math here. Yeah, so 960 minus 44 gives us the number that is here. Moving on to the totals of well, so I did remember that correctly. 11,847 instances of well is what we have in the corpus. That's what we put there in the contingency table. And down here we have the grand total of words in the corpus. Yeah, right. So we're almost there. We're almost ready to calculate the collocational strength of pretty well, except that there's all these empty fields here. Yeah. So we can fill in these missing numbers by subtracting the smaller number from the larger one. So 960 minus 44 gives us 916. If you are like the coolest dude on the planet, you can subtract 11,847 from 12,422,985 and figure that out. Yeah. And as soon as you've got these, yeah, you can subtract the smaller one from the larger one, and you have the one in the middle, and so on and so forth. So you end up with a table where all these numbers are present. Yeah. So you have a fully equipped contingency table, and that's what you're using for the computation of collocational strength. Just to make this a little bit more tangible. So you see these not categories. That means that in this cell here we have the instances of pretty and well, yeah, word 1 plus word 2. Here we have pretty and not well, pretty together with a word that is not well but something else. Here we have the instances, the two word combinations that start with a word that is not pretty and the second word is well. And here in this middle cell of the table, so to speak, we have something that I want you to think about for a minute or 2 or 5. Yeah? Namely, these are word combinations in the corpus that start with a word that is not pretty and continue with a word that is not well. Okay? Got that? So if we have, for instance, a word combination like the big, yeah, It starts with a word that is not pretty, and it starts with a word that is not well. So basically, this number here is also going to be crazy large because, well, there are so many word combinations in a corpus that is this size here. Yeah. Okay. So, but a question that may be on your mind is that, well, now that we know these figures, what the hell do we do with them? Yeah, we still don't know whether pretty well is a collocation or just a chance co-occurrence of words. Well, for this purpose, now finding out whether something is actually a collocation or just a chance co-occurrence of words, there are statistics. There are collocation measures that have been devised for you to figure that out. Yeah. Now, those of you who have AntConc up and running, you will notice, so do me a favor and click on the writer that says collocate, collocates, and then type in the word pretty. In the Windows span control panel, you say, I want collocates from 0 to 1 right. Okay, we're interested in pretty plus something on the right. Minimum collocate frequency you can leave at 1. And the sort by option you can turn to sort by frequency, which I guess is the default. Okay, everything else should be fine. So as soon as you've set everything, hit start, and you should get this kind of display with good as the collocate that comes out on top, and then well, yeah, the collocate that we have been investigating up to this point, in second place. So pretty well is the second most frequent collocation with pretty in this corpus, the A files of the BNC. And you know that there's this column that says stat, okay? And there's a value attached for pretty well, which is 5.58682. Okay, and this number, the numbers that are presented here in the stat column, they represent a collocation statistic that is called the mutual information score. Mutual information, that's one of these collocation measures that are used. And so here we have a value of 5.58. And I'd like to show you how AntConc calculates that number. Yeah, you you see that, well, it agrees with us that there are 44 instances of pretty well. But how do we arrive at this number here, 5.58? Well, there's a formula that lets you do it. And this formula uses these 4 differently colored fields that correspond to the questions of how often do we find pretty well. That would be a field that is red and that I called A here. How often do we find pretty? That is B, that is green. How often do we find well? That is blue, that is C. And how many words are there in the corpus? Okay, and pretty much every collocation measure that you have on the market uses these 4 fields and arranges them in different ways in a mathematical formula. Now you may be thinking, I hate math. I don't like formulas. I don't even understand what they do. Yeah, it doesn't matter. What you need to understand is that, well, here, these numbers, they feed into the formula, and the formula assesses their mutual relations in different ways. I'll show you different formulas for different collocation measures. But for now, what I want you to understand is that these figures go into collocation measures and they then give you a result. Yeah, so it's no witchcraft, it's not magic that somehow happens, but rather it's co-occurrence frequencies and individual frequencies and overall corpus frequencies that ultimately give you an assessment of collocational strength. In this case, mutual information uses a logarithmic function to transform these values here. So we have the frequencies of pretty well, yeah, divided by the total number of words in the corpus. So A divided by B, that's on top here. That figure is divided by the frequencies of pretty divided by the whole number of words in the corpus, multiplied by the number of well instances divided by all words in the corpus. Yeah. Why that is and what that does and so on and so forth, that we can figure out in another day. Yeah. So that's not for today. It's just to show you that mutual information uses these four fields in the contingency table to give you its numbers. Now, if we plug in the numbers from our table, that means we have on top of it 44 divided by 12 million and whatnot. Yeah, so this number here divided by that number there gives you a crazy little tiny, teeny tiny value. And that value is further divided by, well, the instances of pretty, 960, that's what we have here, divided by the whole figure of words in the corpus, and that multiplied by instances of well divided by all words in the corpus. And if you plug in all these numbers and then do the logarithmic function with the base 2, yeah, I'll explain that in another video. It's not crucial for what we're doing here. It just makes things transparent. And if you have a thing for math, if you want to fire up R and do this for yourself, be my guest. Yeah. That gives us actually this number 5.586 that we have seen in AndConc as well. Okay, so AndConc has this kind of machinery built into its software, and it automatically calculates these values not only for pretty and well, but also for pretty and good, pretty much, pretty and little, pretty face, pretty young, pretty soon, and so on and so forth. Okay, and you see that some values, some mutual information values are actually higher than what we have for pretty well. So for example, pretty girl, only 14 instances of pretty girl in the corpus, but the mutual information value is higher. Okay, so that must mean that the component parts of pretty girl, yeah, they occur more often with each other in proportion than pretty well. Okay, so either girl or pretty are more restricted in their behavior than it is with pretty and well. Okay, now those of you who are my students, you can actually open another support material file here. There's an Excel file called Collocations that you have in the course materials. I would like you to open that file. And you notice that it's organized in such a way that you have the collocation, word 1, word 2, the frequencies of word 1 and word 2, the frequencies of word 1, the frequencies of word 2, the words in the corpus, and here there is the mutual information value rounded off a little bit. Yeah, but this is one of the nice things you can do with Excel. You can formulate mathematical formulas. Well, so this is actually what you see here. Yeah, so the logarithmic function with the base 2, and then here are all the numbers of, you know, the red and the green and the blue and the violet, and you have it all there. And this is how it's calculated. It's not witchcraft. Yeah. So now you actually have, you don't need to draw up these tables and calculate things manually. You should just use the Excel sheet if you want to. Yeah. If you're not my student, I'll put a link to this sheet in the description below. Yeah, that I can share. All right. So in this Excel spreadsheet, there are columns, not only for mutual information, but also for other collocation scores. Yeah, the t-score, the z-score, and log likelihood. So let's, well, at some point I'm going to talk about these. For now, when I designed these materials, I wanted you to work with a neighbor. Now, in the times of pandemic diseases, don't work with a neighbor. Work at home. Yeah, you can email your best friend. You can Skype with them, but don't actually invite them to your house. Do me a favor and do this alone. Yeah. So if you have and conc and the corpus open, it doesn't have to be the B and CA elements. Determine the frequencies of the collocations that you see here: dangerous substances, fresh vegetables, send shivers, and determine how often each individual word appears, how often the collocation appears as a sequence, and add the words of the corpus. Yeah, so that would be the same. If you're working with the B and CA data, that would be the same for these collocations here. Yeah, so right. Do me a favor, press pause on this video, do this exercise, and check if the results that you are getting are the same that you get from and conc when you search for dangerous and determine the collocates, the first right collocations for dangerous, for fresh, and for send. Okay, right. You do that now. I'm going to continue with this right now. So we've seen mutual information as a collocation score. Now we're going to look at another one, the so-called T-score. You see that the formula is different, but also the T-score draws on these four items that we have. Yeah, so we have A, the number of occurrences of pretty well, minus this expression here, B times C divided by D. So the number of pretty multiplied by the number of well divided by the overall number of words in the corpus. Now this number here, you may wonder, okay, what does that even mean? It does mean something. It is the expected frequency of pretty well in the corpus. Okay, so we talked about expected frequencies. I will talk more about observed and expected frequencies, but for now you just have to believe me. Well, this expression encodes how often we would expect pretty and well to co-occur together if everything was just random. Yeah. So that tells you that if we have the actual number of pretty well and the expected number of pretty well, if they turn out to be the same, yeah, then this expression A minus this would actually resolve to 0 or be something very close to 0. Yeah. So that means the overall T-score would also be very low. Anyway, so we have A minus the expected frequency of pretty well divided by the square root of pretty well. So in this case, the square root of 44. Let's plug in the numbers and see how this turns out. So we have 44 instances of pretty well minus 960 times 11,800 divided by 12,422,000 and so on and so forth. Okay, and all of that we divide by the square root of 44, and that gives us a T-score of 6.5. Yeah, and if you go to the Excel spreadsheet, you will actually see that the T-score for pretty well is, well, exactly that. Right. We'll talk more about the T-score in just a minute. For now, I want to show you yet another collocational measure that's called the Z-score. And you see that the formula is actually quite similar to the T-score. Yeah, so this is the formula for the T-score, and the upper half is actually exactly the same. Yeah, And the only difference is that the z-score also has the expected frequency of pretty well down here. So instead of the observed frequency of pretty well and taken the square root, we have the square root of the expected frequency of pretty well. So that means that this will influence the values that we actually get. So if we plug in the same numbers again, we get a z-score of 45.03, and again in the Excel spreadsheet that is what you see for pretty well. Right. So here are a couple of collocations that I calculated. So they include the fresh vegetables, dangerous substances, and so on and so forth, and a few others. And there's a little exercise that I would like you to do right now, and that is to look at these tables. They have been ranked in two different ways. So the first table I lined up according to the mutual information value. So the collocation with the highest value is actually sent shivers. Okay, people, I don't think I can resist. Send shivers down my spine, body's aching all the time. Okay, that's going to be it. Right, that's how I came up with the collocation, right? What you see is that send shivers is actually very infrequent, just 4 instances. And Freddie Mercury is responsible for 3 of them. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, and yet it has this high mutual information value. Yeah, so that's actually something that's typical of mutual information. It's super sensitive. Yeah, so collocations needn't be frequent as long as they're very faithful to each other. If we rank the collocations, the same collocations by t-score, you notice that the picture is very different. Yeah, so we have pretty well on top, oil companies, crude oil. So crude oil, that's actually a compromise. Yeah, so both of them rate that fairly high. Because, well, crude, where do you find crude except in the company of oil, right?